right. Good day, everyone. Friends, colleagues from around the globe, thank you very much for joining us today for this online symposium. My name is Kaleem Shah. I am assistant professor with the Energy and Environmental Policy program here at the Biden School, University of Delaware, and I also lead our brand new Island Policy Lab. If you are here for the Science, Technology, and Innovation for Sustainable Post-Pandemic Recovery of U.S. Island Symposium, you're in the right place. So we hope to have a very thought-provoking and energetic session here this afternoon. Just to say, the Island Policy Lab here at UDEL is dedicated to leveraging the best scientific evidence, data, and analytical tools to identify and implement practical policy solutions to the unique challenges that island geographies, island jurisdictions often face. Very unique circumstances of island jurisdictions mean that we need to dig a little deeper, search a little further, maybe even push the envelope on ways, processes, technologies, methods of moving the islands forward. In this symposium, we are looking particularly at the US island territories around the world. We do want to emphasize that we want to make sure that US island jurisdictions are part of the bigger US domestic policy conversation and the US international conversation as well. And we want that inclusion in very equitable ways. As many of us would know, some of, in the world of international development researchers, they often talk about peripheral theory, right? And sort of oftentimes islands, regardless of where you are, sort of relegated to sort of this peripheral group. We here, we don't believe we're peripheral per se, even in sort of the unique challenges that we do face. But we want here to be a space for centering the focus on our island jurisdictions here for sort of the greater good of these communities. And as I said, equitable and fair treatment. So with that, our session here, we have a very distinguished keynote speaker and panelists here, all experts in their own right in different perspectives. So we'll be talking particularly about post-pandemic blue economic recovery for islands. And, just to say also at this point in time, as we designed and developed this symposium, based on a lot of what we learned in our last symposium almost 2 years ago. At that time, we looked at SID, small island developing states in general. And then we decided next time around, we want to do a special treatment on US island territories, where we can then cross-compare best practices, ideas, the discourse between the US island jurisdictions and the small island developing states, the Caribbean, Pacific, Africa, Indian Ocean, etc. Right? So that's part of our aim here as well. So we'll hear from a number of perspectives on that. But in designing this session, something that the current situation in Europe came about, and it sort of even reinforced this idea that some theorists might suggest islands are the periphery. But I think already we're seeing and having conversations that the ripples from such global events, as happening in Europe, as has happened in the COVID-19, they have significant often magnified ripple effects in the island economies, often fragile island economies at that. Um, so it's, it's really about how we build that economic resilience to some of these shocks and crises, be they short term or long term, like climate change, for example, which has both short term and long term implications for us in very significant ways. So this is what we'll be talking about in the panel today. Uh, in terms of islands and economic recovery, there's some very significant statistics that I can maybe point to start us off. Just yesterday, I was at a session held by a Pacific think tank, and I myself had not realized when they did their calculations that, for example, and many folks on this panel will be much more aware that the U.S. does about $160 billion in trade with the Pacific Island region. For me, hearing that figure is phenomenal, and I think sometimes we miss these kinds of the strength of these relationships, for example, and also sort of on the impact side, coming out or almost coming out or keeping our fingers crossed of coming out of the pandemic, and where you have situations of many Caribbean economies with heavy tourism dependency, for example, 80% dependency in places like Aruba, 50-60% in places like Antigua and Barbuda, St. Lucia, Dominica, 40-45% tourism dependency in places like Jamaica and Barbados. There's been significant impacts on these sectors and hence on the island economies more generally. The Inter-American Development Bank suggests that we should be seeing in the Caribbean region, for example, somewhere between 7% to 15% economic contraction, depending on structural issues and how governments have maneuvered through the pandemic season. And then again, sort of even the issues in Europe. I've been following even from my own home country in Trinidad and Tobago, where there are already conversations being happening around things like food security, where the ripple effect of on commodities like wheat, for example, can have impacts on these small markets and security of food supplies, not to mention the energy issues. So with that, we have a lot to talk about in our panel today. So I'm very excited to start. Our keynote speaker, very, very honored to have him here with us, Mr. Basil Ottley. And Mr. Ottley is the Policy Director for the Office of Insular Affairs at the U.S. Department of the Interior. He's held many other senior positions within the federal government and with his home territory, the U.S. Virgin Islands. So he will set the stage for us. He will provide some information on what is going on with regards to insular affairs and under his policy purview, and set the stage for us for the rest of the panel so we can have some robust discussions. So with that, let me hand over to Mr. Basil Ottley. Basil?
Good afternoon and greetings to my fellow panelists and to the viewing audience. I want to begin by saying it's been a great pleasure and an honor to be asked to participate in this panel. And I think it's really a timely discussion for all of the reasons and more that Dr. Shah shared with us. Before I begin, I have to give this disclosure that anything that is represented here today is my own observations and perspectives, and it does not reflect any policy positions or determination by the Department of Interior or the Biden administration. You're getting me in all my glory and glow. And I want to begin my discussion with talking a little bit about something in my past experience where I was stationed in the U.S. Virgin Islands as the Virgin Islands field representative for the Department of Interior, the Office of Insular Affairs. And it was at a time when the Virgin Islands had always led in the number of visitations from cruise ships. But they had noticed that even though they were getting higher numbers of visitation, the amount of per dollar spent by cruise passengers was dropping. And the way to resolve what the main street stores, the main business district needed to pay their rents and to get their profits, they figured the best way to engage in that was to increase the number of berths to begin allowing larger ships to come into town. And on occasion, I would drive through the business district to observe what was happening, what was going on. And on one occasion, I had my two daughters in the back seat, and my eldest was about 6 years old at the time. And as we're driving down the main street, looking at what's happening, and I'm doing my little calculations and what have you, my daughter speaks innocently from the back seat, and she asks a question. She said, "Daddy, why are all the tourists white?" And I can tell you, it was a moment of, when your life flashes before you. I was like, what in heaven's name was going through my little 6-year-old's mind to come up with a question like that? I wondered, well, what was the catalyst for this? Was it the stay vacations we used to have in the local luxury hotels where everything was nice and made perfect for visitors? And she was reflecting on her experience in the public schools, where there were less than perfect and adequate facilities. I wondered if she was reflecting on the times when we were seeking to visit our favorite beach, only to be enveloped by a whole host of visitors from the cruise ships who were all over the beaches and depriving us of our wonderful Sunday opportunities to mix with family because there were no space. And, I was like really troubled, and life flashed before my eyes in terms of how do I respond to this child about something very complex and nuanced. Well, I'm happy to say the discussion today did not bring upon me the types of palpitations that discussion had. But I think it speaks to the complexity, the nuances of the topic of, how do we move beyond COVID and in a blue economy? And in my talk today, what I'm hoping to do is to provide some context to the discussion, to share some of my observations, and then lastly, talk about some opportunities for collaboration between the federal government, agencies and entities like the university and other local collaboration, but most importantly, the people of the places we represent. So I'm going to share my screen quickly, where I kind of want to give you a geographical sense of what we're talking about, to share with you what Dr. Shaw talked about how diverse our places are that we represent, the US territories, but then also how isolated they are. Also in this, there's a lot of history surrounding how they became a part of the United States, but also before they even entered as part of the United States. You had periods of colonialism, enslavement. Then there were periods when they entered the US possession, they were run by either the Navy, and then later by the Department of Interior, and not until the 70s were elected governors allowed, and folks began to really enjoy an advanced stage of self-governance. The next thing I'd like to share is to give you a sense of, how GDP has been changing over time, to show you that there've been some great highs, but some very significant lows across the board. And finally, I'd like to just give you a demonstration on the per capita GDP to demonstrate the great variety between the territories and the United States. And even though these numbers sometimes speak encouragingly about what's happening, I think the real true discussion is there's a lot of other things happening that we need to try to grapple with and understand in a deeper level. And I'm gonna, let me see here, stop sharing. If I can get my computer, okay. There we go. So in terms of observations, as I said, I think all of these numbers here and some of the things that I showed you demonstrate that, you know, we're really talking about a host of complex issues that in talking about recovery, we have to recognize that things were not optimal in these territories way before COVID. And that the activity that has to be undertaken has to begin with that understanding that things were not optimal way before COVID. There were natural disasters that turned the US Virgin Islands upside down, as well as CNMI. There were retractions in the CNMI business industry. American Samoa, who's dependent on tuna, has been impacted by cyclical changes in international agreements. And so everybody has been struggling over time and have been facing tremendous challenges with capacity issues, with folks moving in and out of their territories. It's important to know, as we're talking about the blue economy, some interesting differences. All of the US territories sit outside the US customs zone. All of the US territories, except for Puerto Rico and Guam, are exempt from the Jones Act. And again, very different and nuanced. And all but the American Samoa fall under the Immigration and Naturalization Service for controlling the inflow and outflow of of people coming into their territories. American Samoa is unique in that they control who comes in. So again, a host of different nuances in terms of how all of these places interact with the blue economy and what opportunities and challenges present themselves, right? Very important to note. As I look in terms of the issue of development, some of the observations that I made over time is if you look at the comprehensive economic development strategies that all of the territories produce in concert and with the support of the US Economic Development Administration under the Department of Commerce, they all talk about and they recognize the need to diversify their economies. They list their challenges, which is workforce, capital for private industry, and a whole host of other things. But I think sometimes the one thing that's missing is a clear delineation of why are we engaged in economic development. We talk about diversity, we talk about improving the quality of life of people, but as someone of these communities, I think that, you know, the time has come that we talk beyond jobs, right? I think in this new generation of folks, the discussion of how do those of us who live there acquire wealth? How do those who live there acquire power? And by power, we mean options, choices. How does this investment in economic development translate to those things and really begin to look at how economic development really becomes a transformative activity of social change? That level has really yet to be enjoyed or observed in any of the US territories. And it really requires perhaps a shift in thinking that we need to begin investing in. In terms of opportunities, I think there's great opportunity among institutions like the Biden School, some of the consultants who are here, and even intergovernmentally, to begin looking at, you know, how do we really understand what power means, what wealth creation and development, what that means as territories engage in different methods to diversify their economies, especially when it comes to the environment, right? I don't think anybody really has done a great job of calculating the real costs when it comes to making a decision about, do I give a property developed rights to my beach that will then alter the cultural practice of the places that I engage with? What are the true costs of that? Again, I look at this going back to my daughter who made that observation, a very critical observation. In the name of development, what are we giving up? But most importantly, how do we include the costs to our culture, to our environment, when it comes time to evaluate the different paths to diversification? I think those are the opportunities that lend themselves for us having an engaged conversation about what will lead us in a manner that will provide greater hope and opportunity for the children of the future. And I thank you for the time, and I look forward to having interaction and discussion among the distinguished group of people here. Thank you again for the opportunity.
Thank you so much for that message, Mr. Ottley. And again, yes, so while I think it's emphasized, while there are this number of challenges, they are not just economic, they are social challenges. There are many faceted, right? To use the language that Basil mentioned, right? Sort of there's a multiplicity of challenges happening at the same time. It's quite a complex, oftentimes what we call wicked situations, wicked problems, right? But we're here about solutions, and someone who's very sort of in the know about solutions and potential solutions is our next speaker, Mrs. Kirsten McGregor. And Kirsten is the founder and principal of SAGAX Associates. She works quite a lot in these territories on economic development issues and projects, especially post hurricanes. And she's also a senior fellow here with the Biden School and an affiliate of the Island Policy Lab. So I'm very happy to have her share her experience and perhaps even respond and comment on some of the of Basil's points being that were made. And they work very closely on some projects, so she can bring that dimension as well, linking sort of policy to on the ground actual implementation work. So with that, Kirsten McGregor, please go ahead. You have the floor.
Thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, great. Well, thank you for including me today. I'm also a Delaware resident, so and raised here. So having this connection with University of Delaware, the fact that I work on islands, I couldn't be more thrilled that there's an island policy lab here. But I do miss my work actually physically being in islands with my stakeholders, actually starting to be around the world. But to build on what Mr. Ottley was talking about, we worked interagency from his perspective. I was a contractor for the United States Department of Commerce Economic Development Administration, supporting the US Virgin Islands after they had two Cat 5s, Irma and Maria in 2017. I ended that contract in the summer, but I am still working in the Virgin Islands with another client. And my presentation I'm going to share now, that's what I was taking notes while Basil was talking, because a lot of what, no surprise, a lot of what I plan on discussing, Basil brought up, but Dr. Shaw, I will present it in a way that is complementary and not duplicative, just like federal funding. All right. There. All right, you can see it?
Yes, very good.
All right, thank you. All right. All right. So I believe Dr. Gunnell was on your previous panel, and he works on the Hazard Mitigation and Resilience Plan for the U.S. Virgin Islands, and his home, I believe, is Martinique. But we had several conversations about resilience, and I just want to start out with the concept of resilience. And we feel, and as do a number of professionals, that it's not something that you have, it's something that you do. And I think that the reason that's important is it's about prioritizing all this federal money, which is never enough, and looking at all the different programs that are out there and working on the true cost that Basil talked about, looking and prioritizing projects and thinking about the return on investment, not just monetarily, because what is that impact on the environment? What is that impact on the local residents and culture? So this, again, I'm going to just keep it high level, but this is a graphic to show response. So when the hurricane hits, that's that little bomb there. And I think people have a hard time understanding responses like that time if you get injured and you go to the emergency room and you have those emergency room doctors trying to stabilize you. It may not have fixed the underlying problem. So you're going to have to deal with that. Otherwise, you're going to have ongoing disruption, which we've seen with the pandemic, not just waves of, those waves were not meant to be waves of, I did this during the pandemic, but not waves of pandemic, but waves of any sort of crisis. So you can have an earthquake and then a hurricane. And I think the islands were disproportionately impacted by the pandemic, not only because many of them are tourism based, but also the supply chain issues, but also they have hurricanes and natural disasters are more vulnerable that way. The problem is with each disaster, if you don't look at it long-term, you're just responding and being that emergency room doctor and not dealing with the underlying issues, the pre-existing vulnerabilities that it could be Delaware, it could be, it's not just islands, of course, they become apparent. So what are those pre-existing vulnerabilities? They don't just they can be anything from social justice issues to siloed governance. But what we know, the most vulnerable populations and small businesses are impacted more with each disaster. So this is just trying to convey that you're basically doing the same thing over and over, which is insanity, right? So this graphic I came up with to try and explain that you need to embrace that. I know it's marketing looking, and I apologize, but it is a great graphic. The recovery and resilience mindset, looking at that long-term economic recovery. Of course, I'm coming from the econ side, and I'll get into that in a second. But looking at longer, strategic, comprehensive, and all the different issues that we'll get to that Basil mentioned as well. And I wanted to make sure I mentioned this too, that I've been doing economic resilience, meaning economic development following a disaster or major disruption, for a long time. And I always saw this conflict between the natural environment and the economic prosperity. The fact is they're not in conflict. You can't do one without the other. You have to have a robust natural environment in order to be economically prosperous. And again, I can go, we can have some questions on this because I want to try and keep it high level too, for time for others. The US government does have a national disaster recovery framework, and that's how I worked with Basil. And I tweaked it a little bit, but this framework works wherever you go. So the reason I'm presenting this slide is you'll see in a little bit about how all recovery is cross-sector. You can't look at anything in isolation. So you can't just look at economic, right? So if you're looking at the blue economy, you have to look at all these other moving parts. So government, infrastructure, so roads, transportation, utilities, sewer, health and social services, schools, hospitals, and then natural and cultural resources, museums, beaches, parks, water quality, air quality, housing, of course, housing and having equitable housing, and the number of issues that go along with that. So this slide is intended to be overwhelming, and because I think a lot of people, even in economic development, look at economic recovery in one bucket or maybe two buckets. The fact is all these approaches to economic recovery are interrelated, and you can't look at one without the other. That's why it's hard. It's not easy. If everybody could do it, then I'd be out of work, right? So Basil inferred, he talked about the quality of life. And I think that a lot of economic developers miss this, but people want to live where it's safe, where they have a place to go to the beach, as Basil inferred. But also the flip side to that too, businesses want to go where there's quality of life. So there's power and there's workforce. So they go hand in hand. Business retention is keeping your businesses there so they don't leave, right? Business attraction, bringing those new businesses in. And that, again, you're going to see this theme of how you can't do one without the other. Site readiness. Do you have sites on your islands that have the utility set up for any given business? And if you're thinking about diversifying your economy, you need to understand what that new industry needs. And so we're going to go to industry diversification. That's huge anywhere, but particularly islands, particularly those that are tourism dominant. However, I would like to caution that you can diversify even within tourism. So for the Virgin Islands, for example, Basil brought up the cruise ships. They still are very cruise ship dependent for tourism. And with the pandemic, obviously that stopped. But what happened almost organically, not from a policy, and I will get into this in a bit, but the charter vessel industry just exploded because nobody could go to BVI. And so they were doing charters within the VI, which now is a new way. And we'll get to this in a few minutes, but that's a way to promote the blue economy there and not be reliant on cruise ships. Talent, workforce development is making sure you're reskilling or upskilling or having that K through 12 education and higher education for the residents. So you're not, and I know with islands having smaller populations, there's people like me who are flown in and giving their expertise, but I think teach people to fish and having it be locally driven. I'm a big fan of listening and being curious and having things be locally driven. It cannot, in my mind, maybe Basil disagrees, but it cannot be driven by the federal government. It can be supported by the federal government, but their policies should be locally driven and championed. Talent attraction is honestly, in my mind, for islands, is bringing that talent back that left. Perhaps they went to school stateside or and bringing that talent back. And if you're working on a new industry, you're going to want to make sure that it goes hand in hand there too. Access to capital, banking. We know that that's hard in the Virgin Islands for a number of reasons, but I know it's hard in just even having the banks. But there's also the federal money too. I'm going to have to put my camera down for a sec. Small business support. So small businesses are our biggest employers, certainly in islands, right? They're major employers, and usually micro businesses like mine, like less than 5 people. They need this support because they're the most impacted from natural disasters and the pandemic. The other thing is entrepreneurship and innovation, and the VI that's being spearheaded by the Virgin Islands Research Tech Park, who is a client of mine. And I think with islands, it's cultivating an environment that's supportive of innovation and entrepreneurship. And it's taught at an early level that this is something you can do. And then that turns into all the things I've just talked about. Supply chain, I believe both Dr. Shaw and Basil mentioned supply chain and how, yes, it was Dr. Shaw with food security. And you're isolated, you all know this, not having that one ship come in. If 98% of your food comes is imported, right? So that food security issue is real and serious. And then there's foreign direct investment. We brought this up as well. Islands, more often than not, are in an area surrounded by other nations and impacted by international policy, unlike states. So I'm not going to get too much into this, but certainly you can ask for the presentation in PDF, but these are some stats about like the magnitude of islands. I mean, 175,000 islands are home to more than 600 million people. I mean, just like that. So it's important to look at islands in general, not islands, looking at islands, but we all need to be looking at island economies. And again, the challenges that happen stateside, they happen in islands. However, what I've learned from an academic perspective is the challenges that happen in islands because of their vulnerabilities. They are almost like a great a testing, right, pilot to be, and then because all of this happens stateside, but you can actually really see it so much more in islands. So all the different things that the previous two speakers talked about here. So, and again, that international network, I think that they are leading the way. I think the island community is leading the planning for economic resilience, but all that cross-sector work that I mentioned. And these are those principles, but even identifying, but strengthening them and looking at sustainability, measuring, having those culturally sensitive indicators, and who's going to push it through, right? So what can we learn? Again, I think through policies, regulations, that the type of work that Insular Affairs does and all the different federal agencies, but locally, different tax incentives. I'm going to get to one for the VI as an example. But these are things that I've learned that now I apply to stateside work as well. But this is key to have that cross-sector collaboration, all levels of government, NGOs, private sector, and the community. So what is the blue economy? If there's any key takeaway, I hope, and I'm sure the next speakers will address this too, is that if you talk about the blue economy, not everyone looks at the blue economy the same. They think about it in their own vision. So we mentioned naval and military. There can be marine transportation, whether that's cruise ships, whether that's cargo, commercial fishing, aquaculture, renewable energy could be offshore wind or could be wave energy, offshore mining, natural resources. I know that with pharmaceuticals, sometimes, all the different research that can happen with the natural environment. Shipbuilding, obviously, yacht building, that's becoming something, and that's going to be the last slide I talk about. Tourism and hospitality, obviously, and then and that could be those charter vessels I talked about, and then water sports. So anything, scuba, sailing, and finally innovation and technology. I think that there's a lot of research going on in islands, of course, with Island Policy Lab as an example. So this is, we didn't say it, but the Jones Act, Basil did mention it. It's a federal law that regulates the commerce that ships, goods can only be shipped through US ports. So they have to, and they have to be American flag ships. So that means they were built, owned, and operated by US citizens or companies. So that can be a problem, right? And now Puerto Rico is subject to it, but the Virgin Islands is not. So I can have this link to this report, or you can just Google it, the Revitalization Plan for U.S. Maritime Trade, Commerce, and Strategic Competition. They have recently called for an international open vessel registry based in the Virgin Islands, since they're not subject to the Jones Act. And the Governor Bryant from the Virgin Islands, he assigned an MOU to begin executing, excuse me, sorry about that. So my back, I'm sorry, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, I'm sorry about that. So to get back to the registry here, the Governor of the Virgin Islands had signed this MOU, and this will open up, if executed correctly, of course, the devil's in the details on these types of things, but will open up a whole new shipbuilding workforce in that industry, and then hospitality workforce. There's just so much that can come from this, but the devil's in the details on how it actually gets implemented. So you'll see some pros and cons in the media about this. So that's my final slide. And I'll stop sharing here. And I think that that's it for me. So thank you so much for including me. I really appreciate it.
Hello, thank you very much, Kirsten. That was a very comprehensive overview of what's happening in your work, and also I appreciate sort of the explanation of the aspects of the blue economy, especially for some of us in our audience. We also have quite a few students and so on in the audience, and sort of non-practitioners. So it's very informative of you to do that. As you were speaking about the Jones Act and so on, I have a question for later on, looking at time, but hopefully we'll have some time for Q&As later. But, you know, I think it's important that we look at recovery, both in terms of, you know, what we call top-down governance and sort of bottom-up as well, which is very, very important. And, you know, there's debates on where we lie and what kinds of approaches work better. But I also, I know the work that you've been doing, and as Basil mentioned, but I don't want us to necessarily have the impression that this is all totally like, you know, top down sort of policy that comes down from, you know, the gods or what have you and so on. It's absolutely not that. As you said, it's a lot of cross collaborative work goes into that, into these efforts, and there's a lot of community and bottom up intersections as well. And that was just a thought I had as you were moving through. And perhaps as we go to our next speaker, we can get a little bit more into that and his thoughts as well on some of the comments made by the previous speakers. So next I will introduce Dr. Emilio Pantojas-Garcia, and he is a relatively new friend, I would have to say, a relatively new friend of mine and the Biden School and the Island Policy Lab, but through very old friends. And it was very pleasant to understand in discussions with him sort of the many parallels in the work that he is doing, the very important work that he and his team are doing in Puerto Rico and other places, and some of the work we're talking about here at our own lab in our small way. Emilio is the Senior Researcher and Director of the Institute of Caribbean Studies at the University of Puerto Rico. And he's been working a lot on these recovery issues naturally as well. So I think we will get some perspective, not just on Virgin Islands, but we will also get some perspective here on Puerto Rico's situation and learning from that, from Emilio as well. So with that, let me pass it over to Dr. Emilio Pantojas-Garcia. Emilio?
Good afternoon, and thank you very much for the invitation. It is indeed a pleasure not only to meet all of you, but to listen to your ideas and to discover new venues of research. I must say, in the beginning, that when I was originally invited to the panel, the title was Post-COVID-19 Sustainable Economic Recovery. Then it was slightly amended to read Post-COVID Blue Economic Recovery of Islands, for islands. And what is interesting is that the blue economy perspective is not used at all in Puerto Rico. It is not part of the public discussion. And as I found out, because to be honest with you, I had heard very little about the blue economy. In doing the research for this paper, I found that in the Caribbean is not very high in the agenda either. The studies that I found, one is from a colleague of mine at the University of the West Indies, and he's co-edited, as he co-edited with me earlier, 10 years ago. In 2020, he co-edited a volume on the blue economy. So although the notion and the perspective of the blue economy has been, for about a decade, being discussed, in the Caribbean is not very high. So I wanted to make a few clarifications from the outset so that you understand where I come from. First of all, for me, sustainable economic recovery and blue economic recovery are not synonymous. They are, if anything, blue economic recovery is an aspect of a sustainable economic recovery. Second, we need to understand that the United States territories are vastly different from other islands. In fact, I just finished a book, it's going to come out this year in Spanish, on the economies of the Caribbean, and it is very different to be an island economy that is a territory of the United States, whether it be the Virgin Islands or Samoa or Puerto Rico, and the other islands of the Caribbean or Asia, by that matter. The Puerto Rican economy, I also want to clarify, and this is going to be very important in my presentation, that the Puerto Rican economy has been in crisis for nearly 16 years. I mean, there is what I call the Great Depression of the 2000s. The Puerto Rican economic construction has been sustained for 16 years. So having said that, let me share with you my presentation. Let's see, this is it. Share, are we good? Okay, there we are. And one of the things that as a background idea is, and this is to my point, that the island economies of the territories of the United States are very different. The impact of the COVID pandemic on tourism, which is the sort of axis of development in the Caribbean and in Central America, or the greater Caribbean area, has been enormous. As you can see there, the impact on the gross domestic product has been devastating. The impact on employment has been devastating, and therefore the territories of the United States are very different. Why? Because first of all, we received, look at here, this is the federal emergency relief funds received in Puerto Rico over the last 8 years, since 2014. And you can see all the monies, especially if you go around 2018, that is FEMA. If you go 2019, 2020, those are the earthquakes. On the pandemic, we had the unemployment assistance monies, 9.8 billion in 2020, 8.1 billion. And this is on the right-hand side, you will see all the amount of federal funds that Puerto Rico receives for other things such as health, education, and welfare. So in that sense, we are enjoying a certain advantage. That is the impact. I have a friend, a Cuban friend, who says Puerto Ricans do not protest as much as other islands of the Caribbean because you never hit the hard pavement. There are federal funds as a cushion to break your fall. And this is what has happened over the last 20 years in Puerto Rico, actually longer than that. Well, I should also say that Puerto Rico enjoys, for example, in terms of opening up its economy to tourism, blue economic recovery, our vaccination rate is 81.5%. And I'm talking full vaccinations, 3 dosages. We are actually the highest region in the United States in terms of full vaccination. And that includes other territories as well as the 50 states. So in the short term, it seems that people in the Caribbean are betting at the recovery of tourism, tourism being the anchor of what you may call blue economy. I will tell you that it is not the blue economy later on. But lately, the World Tourism and Travel Council, which is a group that deals with issues of tourism globally, has said that recovery could be good if 4 conditions are met. First, governments allow fully vaccinated travelers to move freely irrespective of their origin or eventual destination. So if you're fully vaccinated and you're allowed to travel globally, that should stimulate the recovery of the tourism economy. Second, the implementation of digital solutions which enable travelers to easily prove their COVID ID status, in turn speeding up the process at borders around the world. I have something called the vacuum ID, which is on my cell phone. I can reach the database of the Department of Transportation in Puerto Rico, and it certifies that I have the vaccines, and it shows you which vaccines I have, and they even have the lot number of the vaccine they used. And so they want to use that globally. I know there are other jurisdictions, but not all jurisdictions outside the developed world. And there's a big divide here between the advanced economies and the less developed countries in terms of these technologies and the availability of these mechanisms. Second, the third point is that the recognition of all vaccines authorized by the World Health Organizations and other international organizations. So that is going to be a very big point in terms of, if you have the Cuban or the Russian vaccine, is that going to count coming into the United States or going other places into Europe? And fourth, the agreement that all relevant authorities that international travel is safe with enhanced health and safety protocols, as well as vaccine equity to ensure no region is left behind. So this is going to be a problem of debate for public policy in terms of the recovery of the tourism aspect of the blue economy and the travel aspect of the blue economy. But going back, having said that, let me go to Puerto Rico. And as I said in the beginning, Puerto Rico has been in a crisis for a long time. If you look at this is the real GDP growth rate of Puerto Rico from 2006 to 2020. And as you can see, it has always been below 0%. It has always been minus something. That is, the Puerto Rican economy has been contracting for 17 years. There have been a couple of respites. 2012, that was a fluke of government policy. The administration of Governor Fortuño borrowed money and injected the economy with borrowed funds, which eventually led to the default of the debt in 2015. And here you can see the both the FEMA post-Maria monies plus the other relief, earthquakes and COVID. And so you see a spike there that came to 1%, but as soon as the COVID, the pandemic came around, it went down. So in that sense, Puerto Rico is still in a recession, a contraction, I should say, but because it's a Great Depression. If you look at the economic activity index, you can see the tendency more clearly. You can see that it continues to fall, and there is no recovery on site. And finally, that has led to a population decrease. That has led to migration and intense population. In fact, it is not only migration that is affecting the Puerto Rican population, which has contracted by 13.7% in the first 2 decades of the 20th century. It is also the fact that because of the economic crisis, let me see if I can say this correctly, the rate of fecundidad, I don't know how to say that in English, but the reproduction rate of Puerto Rican families is 1.2. In order to replace the existing population, you need a reproduction rate of 2. Tasa de fecundidad is what they call it in Spanish. So the fact of the matter is that in Puerto Rico now there is not only a declination or a contraction of the population due to low rates of reproduction, but of low rates of birth, you could say, as well as high rates of migration, but there is also a population substitution. There are people coming in to replace the workers, to buy the abandoned real estate, so on and so forth. So actually, and what is this? What are the causes of this Great Depression of 2000? I've sent my colleagues in the panel an article that I published in 2016 in the Fletcher, the Fletcher Forum of World Affairs. And what I say is these are governance problems. Governance, both international changes in international governance, like free trade and the creation of the World Trade Organization, as well as internal governance program. problems. So what has happened? What has been the response of the government in terms of the crisis, and also, of course, in terms of recovery from Hurricane Maria and the pandemic? These things are intertwined in the case of Puerto Rico. Any economic policy, any economic strategy that is being implemented and developed in Puerto Rico has to do not only with the recent events of Maria and the pandemic and the earthquakes, which happened between 1917 and 2020, no, 2017 and 2020, but with the ongoing crisis, looking for a repositioning of Puerto Rico in the global economy. So what is happening? Well, tourism has been the answer of the government. But in that process, Puerto Rico is a deployment center for cruise ships. So, and Puerto Rico is one of those cities like Puerto Vallarta, where the tourists spend a lot of money. I mean, $100 per visitor, more or less. That's the estimation of the the World Trade and Tourist Council. The tourists, I should say to Basil that his daughter made a great observation, but she was looking from the car. If she had gotten out of the car, they are also foreign. So tourists are not only white, but they're also foreign. And by that, I am not being xenophobic. I simply mean that these people are not there to help us develop cultural understandings and cultural ties. They are there to consume things and to consume the country. There is a new theory, well, it's not new, about the tourist gaze, the fact that people consume places. So we are a place of consumption. In Charlotte, Amalie, there are a lot of beautiful places. In Puerto Rico, you have the old city of San Juan, and you have also the great beaches as you do in the Virgin Islands. So in order to sort of contain and maintain a certain order in the process of development of tourism, the Puerto Rico, not only in Puerto Rico, but in a number of places, we have developed natural reserves. These are places that have a biodiversity interest, that have a historic interest, that have environmental interest. And in this case, I picked the northeastern corridor. This is the northeast of the island, from more or less Rio Grande to Fajardo. And if you look at, there is an overlapping, the arrow shows the point of overlapping. So this goes from here to here, and this goes after here. This is the part that is missing in this part. And what you see is the development of hotels, but those hotels were, in the first term, they were very high-end hotels. They were very expensive. Why? Because the Northeast, let me go here. Because the Northeast has a special place in the conservation of, I think I'm near the end of my time, no? But I'll be quick. They have a special role in the conservation of species in danger of extinction, and like the tinglar, which is the leatherback tortoise, and other species that are autochthonous to Puerto Rico. But what has been the problem? What is the conflict? Well, now there is a conflict between conservation and the development of high-end tourist hotels and apartments. This is a development in the Espiritu Santo Natural Reserve. You can see the destruction here near the beach, and you can see the apartments that are being developed by Paulson and Company, which will cost between $3 and $5 million. You can bet that no Puerto Ricans are gonna live in there. Here is another development in Luquillo, where you saw all the leatherback tortoises. Here, this is a marsh. This is a crucial marsh for the preservation of the environment, of the eco environment there. And Fairfield Hotel is building a luxury hotel. In here, they are saying that they are mitigating and that they are actually building. They are actually. The implication is that they're going to have a better marsh than naturally. That is a very tall story. What is interesting is that these companies allege that they have construction permits. The interesting thing is construction permits are big business. Here you can see all the permits given in Puerto Rico for construction in coastal areas from 2015 to 2021, the majority of which are all of the permits, the majority of which, the green ones, are in coastal towns. Those permits thus far have been more to the northwest and the southwest. What is now at stake is the northeast and the northeastern part of Puerto Rico, which was virtually untouched until very recently. And what is the problem? The problem is that Puerto Rico has elected a model of tourism that is that of a tax haven. Puerto Rico is more like Antigua and Barbuda and the Cayman Islands. That is, they are becoming tax havens for the rich. They are building properties for that. There is a law 20 and 22, exempts non-resident Puerto Ricans who move to Puerto Rico, and they have to pay only a 4% tax rate. And in fact, the IRS is looking into this because this is a form of legal tax evasion. Puerto Rico has increased its tax haven activity after the Panama Papers. In fact, Puerto Rico is becoming the Panama of the Caribbean, the substitute of Panama. Why? Because the United States has not signed the international agreement on exchange of information on named accounts, or on accounts that do not have a name to it. And in that sense, Puerto Rico was categorized, Puerto Rico and all the territories were classified by the OECD as dangerous dangerous zones in terms of the money laundering, the hiding of money, etc., etc., etc. So ultimately, what you're seeing in Puerto Rico, which may be different from what you see in other places, is that there is no blue economic recovery. There is no conscience of a blue economy strategy. There is actually the promotion of tax havens. Actually, Puerto Rico, here is a comparison that I made for the book that I spoke about between tax havens and casinos in tropical Asia and in the Caribbean. Actually, this should say tropical Asia, not Asia Tropical, that's in Spanish. But in any case, you can see there, and if you want, I can send you a copy of it, the amount of tax havens that have casinos, and now they're developing great gated communities. They're talking about safety. People like to live in safe places. That is of no concern to these people, because what they do is they close the beach, they enclose the area, and they build a gated community, which impedes the access of the local people. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Emilio. Very, very frank discussion here, which is what we're all about. Very frank points being made. And I do hope that maybe Mr. Ottley might have some comment on that later on. And not just to say my fault, I should have said at the beginning for our audience, because I'm getting some emails on questions. Please put your questions and comments in the Q&A box, and we will get to them and also push them out to the panelists at the end. And sort of to Emilio's points, yes. So blue economy, in other Caribbean countries, they talk about green economy. I myself, I've worked extensively in places like Guyana on green economy issues. The Inter-American Development Bank talks about the creative industry, the orange economy. But our intention here is sort of not to do that kind of economic pathway branding. We leave that for the politicians, so to speak, but really to dig in to those deeper, more fine-grained issues, as Emilio has so ably helped us with, especially in the case of Puerto Rico. Moving on, next, our next speaker will be Mr. Noorani Azeez, and his contribution here is very pivotal to the economic recovery discussion, as echoed by every speaker so far. The voice, the view, the perspective, the concerns, and the role of the private sector in economic recovery or economic redevelopment. And definitely, Mr. Azeez is the one to speak about this, also from many perspectives that he holds in terms of board positions and advisory positions in a number of the, not just the St. Lucia, being the Chief Executive Officer of the St. Lucia Hospitality and Tourism Association, but also as an independent senator in the House of Parliament in St. Lucia, and also, I don't know where he finds all the time, but as an advisor and committee member, executive member on many of the regional Caribbean tourism boards and agencies. So we're very pleased to get this kind of perspective from our next speaker, Mr. Noorani Azeez. The floor is yours, Mr. Azeez.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Professor Shah. It's quite a distinguished pleasure to be speaking amidst a panel of such highly esteemed representatives from such diverse sectors. I will just proceed to quickly share my PowerPoint presentation, and I will speak from there. First up, as we're probably all aware, St. Lucia is not a US island territory, but notwithstanding that, I do see a lot of similarities in terms of the challenges shared or expressed by some of the speakers and the presenters earlier on. So let me just begin by giving us a sneak peek into our little island destination. A population size of about 180,000. Languages officially English, and recently the local language of Creole has been slowly over the past few years increasingly integrated into our language and voices spoken in the House of Parliament and within our communities. Tiny in terms of square miles, 238 square miles, but proud to say that we boast 2 Nobel laureates and a UNESCO World Heritage Site. We are the distinguished recipients of the Caribbean's leading honeymoon destination 12 times and world's leading honeymoon destination 13 times. As far as it relates to the Caribbean leading honeymoon destination, we're proud to have received those accolades for the past 8 successive years. Among our distinguished iconic persons on island, we have persons who are very internationally renowned, hailing from the field of culture, entertainment, culinary arts, and sports, in the persons of Dame Cecil Descartes, Ronald Buhingson, Laverne Spencer, Darren Sani, and Chef Nina Compton. Relatively young independent state, having acquired our independence in 1979, and the better part of the past 40 odd years, we have been wrestling with transitioning from an agrarian economy to a tourism dependent economy. And as it relates to the issue of tourism dependence, I know various scholars, various authors, various studies will put us at different points on the scale of dependency as a small island developing state. But it was interesting to see these notes from Statista that ranked us second only to Aruba in terms of our tourism dependence. Tourism does account for approximately 1 in 4 jobs on island, and does indeed make a significant contribution through value-added tax, tourism levies, some corporate taxes, as well as generally to the GDP of the island, to the real GDP of the island. We are noted as being the largest export sector, And over the past 2 years, we have been seeing a growing dependence or contribution. Notwithstanding that increased contribution to the GDP of the island, that does not come without a level of consternation and resentment from some community circles for all of the reasons shared by some of the speakers earlier on. But in terms of the pandemic and the context of what would constitute sustainable recovery, I'd like to put to you from a private sector point of view, based on the discussions that we are actively involved in on the ground right now, that elements of a sustainable recovery for us as a private sector, and I think more and more embraced by other stakeholder actors, those elements should include improved visitor arrival numbers, increased guest spend, increased food security, stimulation of economic diversification, development of our human resources, risk mitigation using some insurance models that we're experimenting with right now, greener tourism practices, which not only speaks to the green economy, but the blue economy and the orange economy as well as community-based tourism. And the idea, though, is that the human element, the human capital element would be front and center of all of these other aspects of sustainable tourism development. Now, in terms of visitor numbers to the island, we see very clearly that over the past 2 years, we keep, there has been a growing, a consistent increase in the number of visitors to our shores. This was topped off in 2019, where we had our highest numbers of visitors for that year. 2/3 of that group easily hails from the cruise sector, and the stayover arrivals accounts for the next big block. However, it's interesting to note that as it relates to spend per guest, the yachting sector accounts for the highest spend per visitor to our shores. Currently, we are looking, last year when we mapped the spend for guest after we'd like to say as we progress throughout the recovery, the average spend per guest seemed to be fluctuating heavily and averaging off at about $75 per person. We would ideally like to see this doubled. And so the discussions on growing the tourism industry and positioning other actors to harvest the gains from the industry is looking at this as one of those metrics. Increased food security is something that has emerged front and center throughout our very, very, very dramatic experiences with the COVID pandemic. And throughout this, we realized that really and truly, as we tried to transition from an agrarian economy to a tourism-based economy, there seemed to have been a lot of neglect of the agricultural sector. But during the times, during the closure of our borders, during the suspension of tourism trade, we found ourselves, and the challenges with our supply chain systems, we found ourselves increasingly dependent on local farmers and fishers to provide for our needs. Thankfully, though, just before the pandemic, we had already entered into discussions with the Taiwan Technical Mission for the introduction of what we call a 7 crops project. When we looked at our import bill and the number of items which were consumed largely by the tourism sector, we scaled it down and identified 7 crops, which are listed here, as those crops which we want to encourage more of our farmers to produce, thereby guaranteeing them a higher price per pound and guaranteeing the tourism industry some level of consistency of supply, ultimately reducing our food import bill. The assessment of the first phase of this initiative indicated that there was a marginal reduction in the importation of these items, and this has now been extended, hopefully until the end of this year. When we revisit it, hopefully we would see a lot more movement in terms of the production of these items, the consumption of these items locally, the possible exportation of some of these items, and the reduction in the food import bill. Now, one other glaring aspect that emerged from our experiences with the pandemic was the need for us to look at greater economic diversification. And earlier on, I know one of our speakers indicated that there can be diversification within tourism. And that is certainly part of the discussion in terms of economic diversification for a small island state such as St. Lucia. But I think as one of the crafters of policy on island as well, I would like to see us use tourism as a leverage point, something to help us to pivot to expand other areas of the economy, which may not necessarily be so dependent on the tourism industry to ply its trade. And so moving forward, there has been quite some discussions in recent times in terms of agro-processing of a number of items which have, we're seeing external demand for. And so, that is being mapped out as well. There continues to be a growing demand for information and communication technologies and the need for us to rationalize the policy environment to manage that. Health and wellness is another area that is emerging as tremendous potential. And I think for us, this has some implications as it relates to diversification within the tourism industry itself. And then alternative energy, something that we have been putting lukewarm attention to in the past, now increasing in urgency. We want to revisit discussions on geothermal energy, wind and solar in order to divest our dependence on natural gas. Development of human resources, some initiatives that are in the pipeline, the OECS Network of Excellence in Tourism and Hospitality Training and Education, the Eastern Caribbean Institute of Tourism, and expanding Tibet assessment and certification. Why? Because as alluded to by an earlier speaker, we have to start looking in terms of how we generate wealth and serious career growth path for our people through the tourism industry and through the diversification efforts that are so intertwined. For us, just the mere generation of jobs is no longer sufficient as a metric, and we have to look at how we increase wealth opportunities, wealth generating opportunities for our communities and even our youth at risk. One of the risk mitigation strategies that we have been using as a private sector to try to nurture the sustainability and the growth of small and medium type enterprises has been elements such as group medical insurances, public liability insurance, travel insurance, crop insurance, and looking at how we can work with individuals to build business continuity systems, thereby engaging them to be a bit more resilient in terms of recovering from natural disasters and matters related to the pandemic. We have seen a catastrophic impact of these on our coffers over the past 2 years, but I do believe that the pandemic served as a very, very rude wake-up call for our policymakers on island, and we see potential for us to action these because there seems to be a convergence of, or a consensus of commitment from idealists from both political fence right now. For us, the discussion on greening tourism practices, we have had in our archive since 2018 efforts at St. Lucia's National Adaptation Plan. As a private sector, we have engineered our own environmental best practices handbook, and that is in circulation freely. We have partnered very aggressively with the state in terms of adopting single-use plastic policy, and hopefully by 2022, we're going to see the actual banning of a number of products, plastic products from coming into the destination. Sustainable tourism, sustainable procurement practices is another discussion that we have been involved in over the past years. And I think what is emerging is that even before the pandemic, there were quite a few very encouraging things that we have been doing that holds even greater significance and value for us as one of the small island developing states right now. But the trick is, how do we fast track the completion of these plans, the institution of these plans, map the returns from them, and then create policies to manage or to guide the next 5 to 10 years of our development. As a private sector as well, we have had our own undertaking with other international private sector actors to look at how we can reduce or offset our carbon footprint. And those discussions as well lead to best practices that we share with other sectors on island, including manufacturing and other commercial sectors, in addition to sharing those best practices regionally and internationally. I think one of the things that will be central, as I said, to our sustainable recovery from the pandemic is the people element of our recovery. Community-based tourism focus is something that is actually, as we speak right now, it is before Parliament right now in terms of legislation that will move towards the creation of a community tourism agency that will seek to harmonize or pull together operators, single operators, small operators who are based resident within non-traditional tourism communities, and work with them to look at establishing tax relief, registering them, helping with the standardization of their operations, and marketing them on the international scene. I think for many of us, this is going to be a game changer over the next 12 to 18 months, because it shifts the discussion away from mass tourism, foreign direct investment, to localized tourism development using local players, and thereby ensuring that more of that tourism dollar remains resident within our economy. So for us, as I indicated, the aspect of human capital development and how we can support that, we believe, is central to those recovery efforts. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your perspective, Mr. Azeez. Well taken and well appreciated. A number of points that you made, echoing some previous speakers, but also sort of compounding and explaining for us the situation in St. Lucia, and definitely with parallels to the broader Caribbean region. And, you know, as you were speaking, I'm thinking about some of these conceptualizations of pathways, particularly in the tourism sector. And I was thinking also about another term, circular economy. So sort of looking at the inputs and outputs and finding the synergies across there. And you spoke about synergies between, for example, food security and the tourism sector. These things are vitally important. These sort of where we can hit these win-win situations would be very vital, as you said as well, these leverage points. We've spoken a lot about possibilities and probabilities, right? But at some point in time, based on on factors of reality, we have to identify what are the priority pieces that we can push that pull along some of the other aspects of the economy. So I really take that point. Another interesting point on the diversification, with the sort of the internal opportunities, but also the diversification from that tourism platform to look at things like clean energy and ICT and so on. And again, I think those are sort of the strategic opportunities that lie before us. I just quickly, last thing, I saw your slide on the Airbnb, for example, and I do want to speak to you more about that, as we've spoken before a little bit. But I do think that we can leverage some of the machine learning and data analytical kinds of methods that we use here at the Island Policy Lab and across Biden School now to sort of assist and collaborate on looking at those kinds of emergent issues. These, as I said, the new economy, right? So thank you very much, Mr. Azeez. Our final speaker today was supposed to be our Mrs. Kate Brown, the Executive Director of GLISPA, the Global Islands Partnership, now sort of headquartered out of New Zealand. Unfortunately, Kate has COVID-19, and she's doing okay so far, but she could not be with us here at the last minute. Quite luckily for us, and well appreciated, is she has asked her strategy manager of GLISPA Mr. Jabal Hassanali, to present her remarks and points and give us some perspectives here today. So we well appreciate that last minute Mr. Jabal Hassanali joining us. So I would also just add that Jabal is one of our very promising, more youthful experts, folks in this space. And as a fellow countryman of mine, I'm going to put him on his spot and absolutely make sure that he gives a very, very interesting presentation today. So I'm actually going to put a little pressure on Mr. Hassanali today. All right. I'm just kidding, but please go ahead, Jabal. The floor is yours.
Thanks, Callum, and great to be here today. I'm on this esteemed panel. Really wonderful hearing the points and the perspectives being shared today. I know they usually say they save the best for last, but I think I'm probably going to prove that point wrong today, but that's because the other speakers are also excellent. Yes, as Callum said, my name is Jabal Hassanali. I'm the strategy manager at GLISPA, Global Island Partnership. And what I really want to talk about today is basically how partnerships and networking amongst and between islands is a really credible tool in facing some of these challenges, such as COVID-19 and other global challenges that affect islands very significantly. And here at GLISPA, we really have the ethos that a lot of the stuff we pioneer and innovate in islands are the solutions for these global problems. Islands have it, a lot of it in-house and in knowledge amongst themselves. We need to talk to each other more. We have a lot more commonalities between islands rather than, let's say, other jurisdictions, like in terms of being part of a US island or a European territory. The types of challenges we face as islands together, SIDS or whatnot, it is very common across all islands, and there's a lot more to be had from dialogue between islands and facing these problems together. So I'm going to share a few examples of the way this networking has resulted in initiatives that prove my point. I kind of spoke earlier about how last year's conference was focused more on SIDS and this year is more US islands. I think when he does the analysis and goes back, he realizes that it's a lot of shared history and shared problem solving that they can utilize in terms of how they confront these challenges. I think all these speakers spoke to that a lot today. So here at GLISPA, basically, what we try to do is showcase these solutions, and we call them bright spots. We try to focus optimistically on what islands are doing in the field and in facing these challenges. So we call it bright spots, and bright spots are proven concepts that are ready to be scaled and that showcase successful solutions to island resilience and sustainability resulting from community partnership. So what we try to do is throughout the year, showcase what is happening across islands, across the world, from a local level and community level, and give them a visibility on the international stage among global policymakers to show that these are the things that you need to talk about, that you need to prioritize in terms of allowing these initiatives to flourish and to be scaled and replicated across more contexts and territories. So that's our kind of day-to-day, but I want to focus on two initiatives in particular, and that's our US chapter, which is the Climate Strong's Islands Network of GLISPA. And what we do through the CSIN network, it has a mission to build an effective coalition of island entities that work across sectors and geographies in the continental US and the nation states and territories located in the Caribbean and Pacific, your Guams, your Puerto Ricos and whatnot. And what they try to together advocate for these territorial islands whose needs are not always met at the federal level in terms of the federal direction, in terms of policies for mainland US. These islands tend not to be included as much, or their priorities are not given as much focus. And this network gives a forum for them to say what they need and what are their needs and their special needs in Washington, DC itself. So it's a partnership we have with Ocean Foundation, and the main objectives are to drive more resources locally to islands and advocate for policy and legislation that represents the local needs and opportunities for U.S. islands. The network prioritizes linking U.S. island champions, on-the-ground organizations, and local stakeholders to each other to accelerate progress, share lessons and knowledge, and build lasting trust to support ongoing cooperation. So basically what we do at GLSPA, but focus more on the U.S. islands themselves. I just want to let you know that in 2 weeks, there'll be a spring gathering of the CICN where they'll run through a new policy framework that the network has developed, and you can go to the website to check out the details, climatestroundsislands.org. And the main topic I want to focus on, so I'll share my slides on, is another initiative that GLSPA is the co-secretariat for, along with our member Hawaii and Hawaii Green Group. And this is a really exciting initiative that kind of brings together what GLSPA has been trying to do for many, many years. And that's the local 2030 Islands Network, a network of islands economies working together for a sustainable world to achieve the SDGs. So we launched in 2019. It's based on the premise again that islands are leading and uniquely positioned to share innovative solutions that can be scaled globally. And that's because, yes, we're on the front lines of climate change. Yes, we're the most vulnerable. Yes, big global events like the pandemic have an outsized effect in terms of how they affect islands, but we're not victims. And that's because just by our physical constraints of being islands, we have been forced for centuries to have a systems thinking approach. We pioneered that, a circular economy approach, and it's trying to rediscover that and showing the world that we can lead the way in solutions. So the local 2030 Islands Network is the world's first global island network devoted to the sustainable development goals through locally and culturally informed solutions, not top down, from the bottom up, trying to interpret the UN SDG goals in ways that are meaningful for islands themselves and our members themselves. We are a peer-to-peer network of islands helping islands with support of strategic partners. So a really important precept of the local 2030 Islands is that all islands can join. US islands, Caribbean islands, there's no divisions. It's peer-to-peer, there's no one telling anyone what to do. But it's true that bringing together all islands, we can also bring in partners who can lend assistance federally. So we have a lot of federal partners through Hawaii being a member of the local 2030 Islands Network. We have a lot of support federally from different agencies such as NREL and NOAA. Together, we are committed to improving the lives of island people and sharing island solutions with the world. And our vision is a sustainable island inspired by island leadership and values. And to go down more, the mission is to catalyze island partnerships and action to achieve the SDGs by connecting local leadership and sharing solutions. And I'll delve into how we've concretely been doing that so far. And we have 4 guiding principles that characterize our work. And before a member joins, they have to sign a letter from their political leadership saying that they will adhere to these 4 principles. And they also mention in their letter of commitment what they want to prioritize, what exactly they want to focus on in being part of this network and solve for in terms of the SDGs, their local SDGs. So the 4 principles are local goals, having public-private partnerships, realizing that we need everyone on board. It can't be governments alone. We need the CSOs, the business community, in order to actually have a vision for how we interpret the SDGs. It has to have a whole of society approach, and we're focused on building these public-private partnerships for each of our members and following a process to get that done. These locally, culturally informed SDGs development goals that we developed have to be measurable. So we have to find a way to track these goals and develop indicators for each island economy in terms of how they're going to track these goals and also find a concrete action. So just to delve into our first bright spot is Hawaii, because basically a founding member of the local 2030 Islands Network. They're also the HGG, their public-private partnership, the Hawaii Green Growth is basically their version of the public-private partnership that we speak of and can serve as a model for other islands. So they are our core secretariat in terms of doing the local 2030 Islands Network. And Hawaii created a sustainability model that connected island values and indigenous wisdom with modern innovation and policy. And the story of this, actually, it came out of another global crisis, the financial crisis in 2008. The US hosted APEC in Hawaii that year. And it's kind of, that was the catalyst for Hawaii getting that public partnership together and forming Hawaii Green Growth and kickstarting that process. And they measure and showcase these SDGs, these localized SDGs, through something called the Aloha Plus Challenge. So their public-private partnership, Hawaii Green Growth, then that network convenes 150 plus partners across government, business, and civil society to set priorities, measure progress, and catalyze action on their 2030 goals in a locally relevant way. If you go online, they have a dashboard that tracks Hawaii's contribution towards a global goal with community-based metrics identified through a 4-year engagement process. This open data platform informs policy and empowers household action. So this is just one of our members, and Hawaii was inspired by other similar type island initiatives in the Pacific, such as the Micronesia Challenge and also in the Caribbean Challenge. And then in doing this, realized that why not form a fuller network across all islands, no matter the region. And so the circle, it was like a feedback loop, that iterative feedback loop that kind of tells the story of how the local 2030 Island Network came about, and is Hawaii being inspired by other islands, and then in turn inspired to start this fuller membership. So if we can do it, let's try and help other islands do it as well in a peer-to-peer fashion. So the network law is launched against the backdrop of a circular economy and the water, food, energy nexus projects. Those are the kind of concrete actions we want to see in each island. And concrete stuff such as carbon offsets and watershed resilience models, things that are really unique for islands and are really priorities for us that we need to have in order to survive in case there's a like supply chain crisis and so on. We need to be able to stand up for be resilient for ourselves, and we have the tools and the capabilities to do that. And yeah, this is really trying to bring that out again I think we do it a lot informally. It's in a more formal way in terms of showcasing to the rest of the world, this is what islands can do. And the main tool we do this is through convening what we call communities of practice. So our members will convene communities of practice across different topics that the members themselves prioritize. And then we kind of, once we know the different topics, right now we have one in clean energy, we have one on data and development and dashboard, similar to what you saw at Hawaii. Guam is another example of a champion in terms of developing their own dashboard, and they also have a similar public-private partnership network similar to HGG. So what we do is we organize these different topics, and then the members can the focal points of our members can recommend who across each sector will be best placed to speak and to learn from these different communities of practice we organize. And then our partners can also provide technical assistance as well where needed, and assisting capacity building. So that's kind of how the model works in practice. And we have a community practice on clean energy. We have one on data and dashboards, and we will soon launch one on sustainable tourism. I believe the speaker before me, he doesn't know this as yet, but he has been identified as someone who can possibly assist in us as being an expert to help in technically supporting that community of practice when we launch it. So we'll be chatting with you soon. Sorry to put you on the spot. This slide here just speaks to the kind of circular way in terms of how the local 2030 Island Network was formed, which I spoke to earlier. Hawaii being inspired by the Caribbean Challenge and the Micronesia Challenge, and to going through their process through the Aloha Plus Challenge and teaming up with GLISPA to kind of kickstart the local 2030. Some early achievements: we have a membership of 14 diverse island economies. Basically, we were formed right as COVID kicked in, so we had to kind of change gears, and we did these COVID-19 virtual platforms instead. A lot of build back webinars where we shared solutions and lessons as the pandemic unfolded in real time. A lot of those are available on our website. You could view those recordings. And in those sessions, we shared a lot of different bright spots across 60 different countries and 2,000 participants. We kickstarted 2 island green growth initiatives, so Hawaii and Guam, I mentioned before. We've launched the 2 specific communities of practice. In December, we launched the clean energy. January, we launched data and dashboards, and soon we'll launch the sustainable and resilient regenerative tourism in hopefully in April. And we also secured some seed funding and money from the US as well as Ireland. And these are foundation members of the 2030. As that's what the US, of course, being represented by Hawaii. And yeah, so we're chugging along. We're kind of building the airplane and flying it at the same time. And a lot of things are happening at once as we get the funding. And it's really exciting. And I think, yeah. And we plan for in 2025 to increase our membership to at least 35 island economies. We want to have at least 4 types of dashboards fully developed. So that means that will mean that it's not cosmetic. So in order to have a dashboard, you need to go through the process of coming up and localizing your goals. So that means you need to have that deep dive of forming of stakeholder consultation with across the island. So behind the bells and whistles of a dashboard, it takes a lot of work. So we want to have by 2025 at least 4 island dashboards and SDG partnerships. We want to increase our communities of practice. We want to develop a think and do tank across the island about the island circular economy and specifically. We want our members to have a visible presence across international events like COP and the Oceans Conference in Palau soon, where we lead. Like similar to the Major Economies Forum, where you have these world leaders in the G7 and stuff issuing statements. We want islands to be represented on that level and that type of level and have that type of influence and deliver joint statements as well. And yeah, we just want to keep building that network foundation, make sure our funding is sustainable and that, yeah, we have the Secretariat developed well enough to support its island members as needed. So thank you for allowing me to share. That's the end of my presentation. And unfortunately, I have a Bright Spot event coming up soon, so I might not be able to stay for many questions, but Kyle has my information and you could feel free to email me if you have any follow-up regarding what I just spoke about. So thanks a lot.
All right, thank you very much, Jabal. Well done. Thank you for representing GLISPA and the great work that you're doing. So I should also mention that I have been working for many years now with Kate Brown, but only very recently through the Island Policy Lab, we've actually become an official member, formal member of GLISPA very, very recently. So it's sort of in our effort to collaborate in more structured and formal ways and contribute, since many of us are working in similar directions. So we're very happy to sort of formally join sort of the GLISPA family on many.
Really happy to have you.
Thank you very much, Jabal. And I'll just quickly, and we're out of time, but I'm quickly going to also sort of announce that the Island Policy Lab is working on an initiative now with GLISPA, launched this year, where there's bright spot solutions, solution sets, solution examples, and case studies that GLISPA documents, especially community-based solutions to sustainable development challenges. The Island Policy Lab will be working now with GLISPA to add to that kind of knowledge product, where we will be developing these bright spot cases into expanded case studies that would be relevant to the academic learning process. So placing, for example, placing these stories, community stories, into the context, the theoretical context, the theoretical frameworks, and so on. So it becomes an educational product as well as a sort of practitioner product, a product that we can use in our classrooms for teaching on these issues and so on. So we're very excited about being able to collaborate in this way, and we look forward to working even more with GLISPA. All right, so thank you very much, those of you who have stayed on with us even though we're out of time. What I will do at this point is I would like to ask for final comments or thoughts, very quick comments or thoughts from our previous speakers, and I'll go backwards from Mr. Azeez, move forward. So Mr. Azeez, final thoughts and comments.
Well, thank you for the opportunity to share our perspectives as private sector with you all this afternoon. I think in leaving, I just wish to emphasize the fact that our recovery has got to be so centered on human capital development. It has to be built on the elements of creativity and innovation. And we don't believe that anyone can drive that more than the people who are indigenous to our shores. We would like to see solutions and play a much more active role in crafting what they deem to be their future, and play a central role in defining what constitutes sustainable development for our island. Thank you once again for the opportunity to share.
Thank you, Mr. Azeez. Emilio, last thoughts and comments?
Thank you very much. I'm thinking that we need to extend this dialogue. Definitely, I'm glad to have been able to participate and listen to all of you. I have many concerns, but I just want to raise with Mr. Azeez the concern of the problem that we have in Puerto Rico and they have in the Mediterranean, the Baleares Island, which is that the Airbnbs in San Juan, for example, have been bought by a Chinese investor. And this person has bought about 300 properties, which were residents before. So the idea of regulating Airbnb development and sensitizing owners to manage it well is very important. Thank you very much, and I wish you, all of you, the very best.
We are very happy to have you and your perspectives, Emilio. And yeah, so my students and I, we have just published with the Wilson Center here in DC, a small piece on China's investment in the Caribbean, and the impact, the environmental impact. So that is coming out very soon. And yeah, I totally agree, Emilio, with that sentiment that issues like that can be the subject for further dialogue, further discussion, and exploration here. So with that, Kirsten, final thoughts and comments from your end?
Well, this has just been wonderful, a treat for me. I'm looking forward to doing more with the Island Policy Lab as I expand beyond the Virgin Islands. I've talked to actually a few professors at UD who do work with islands. So really excited all the work that you're doing and how you've expanded over the past year. And we actually met through Kate, so I hope she's doing well and thinking of her. I'm actually a Kiwi myself. I was raised here, but thank you for putting this together. And I guess the one key takeaway with the blue economy is, and I'm mirroring other people, is have it be locally driven and look at it through multiple lenses. It's not maybe the one lens that you're perhaps used to. So thanks.
Thanks very much, Kirsten. We really appreciate your helps. So this is a common theme, right? Sometimes, so Kirsten is working with the Biden School downstairs, and Kate Brown, in discussion from New Zealand to Delaware, asked me if I know Kirsten downstairs. And lucky for us, that connection was made. Sometimes these are the lucky ways things happen. And with that, perhaps very fitting final thought to take us home from this very robust discussion, Mr. Basil Ottley. Final thoughts.
Yeah, just want to again thank you for the opportunity to be on a panel with Chuck's distinguished and informed panelists. From my brethren from Puerto Rico, I think the point that he made in terms of the unique experience of the U.S. territories that they face towards development. It's interesting that from the smallest to the largest, there are many similar challenges, but is definite that the current pattern and perspective of how to help them move forward does not work. And I think there's going to be much work needed to really bring folks together from different perspectives, from the international community, but as well as from the local folks who are really impacted by these the lack of progress, to really begin collaborating and understanding what is the vision future for these places and how can they take the lead in shaping what that future looks like. So thank you for the opportunity.
And with that, thank you very much to our panelists, our speakers, and to the audience who've been very good to stay with us. And we will continue with these discussions. Please join our mailing list and look out for more information and communications from us. Thank you very much. Just a quick house note, we have our final session for today coming up in 1 hour from now at 5 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, and that is the Environment and Climate Change panel, if you are interested and have not registered yet. All right, thank you very much, everyone. Be well, be safe, take care.